Good morning. It is Wednesday, the 13th of May. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, your daily digest of European news and context, live here on Euronews. Coming up in headlines that bring back memories of the global COVID pandemic, Spain has confirmed a positive hantavirus case among passengers who disembarked from a cruise ship in Tenerife this week. The World Health Organization says more cases will come, but insists there are no signs of a new pandemic. This as Hungary swears in a brand new government under freshly elected Prime Minister Péter Major. The move brings an end to the 16 years of Viktor Orban's rule. We'll hear who's who in the new administration with our correspondent in Budapest. And with the world's attention focused on the deadlock between the US and Iran over the Strait of Hormuz, Israeli bulldozers have been tearing down Palestinian shops near Jerusalem, clearing land for a settlement-linked road project. Just this week, the EU signed off on sanctions against Israeli settlers over violence in the occupied West Bank. But first, Syria is in the spotlight this week, with Damascus holding high-level political talks with the European Union here in Brussels. In an exclusive sit-down with Euronews, Syria's foreign minister said the country will not allow a, quote, rushed, unorganised return of Syrian citizens from Europe. Minister Asaad Hassan al-Shaibani called on the European Union to support the reconstruction of his country after the brutal civil war. Our European editor, Maria Tadeo, sat down with the minister and is here on set this morning to bring us up to speed. First, tell us about these talks in Brussels.
Well, Maeve, the talks obviously come at a pivotal moment for Syria. This is a country that is clearly in a political transition, is coming off of two very difficult decades, completely turbulent on a political front, a civil war that lasted almost 14 years, very brutal. Obviously, that also led to a massive wave of Syrians who left the country, many of which, of course, ended up in Europe. The authorities now in Syria, led by President al-Sharaa, they argue that this is a moment to rebuild, reconstruct, and make this country more stable. They have, of course, reached out to the United States. They are in close ties with Turkey, the Gulf countries, but another key partner in this, and they say this openly, this came up multiple times in my interview with the foreign minister, is the European Union. At this stage, as it stands, the European Union has lifted sanctions on Syria to give the economy a breather. It also is now moving into the full implementation of a cooperation agreement between the two countries. Obviously, the goal, again, is for the EU to play what they argue would be a stabilizer role in the country. And for Syria, it's about rebuilding the economy, so you have conditions for people to return and get this country back on track to the extent that it's possible in the shortest amount of time. Now, the EU, however, will say to fully restore ties with Syria, the authorities, the government there needs to ensure that their minorities, both religious and ethnic, are respected and they have equal rights. This principle of inclusivity is incredibly important for Brussels. So the message that was stressed to the Syrians, as I'm told by a number of diplomats, is that yes, there is a window of opportunity. The EU wants to see a partnership that could see this country finally becoming stable in the Middle East. They also see it as a way to counter what they describe are malign actors, including Russia. Of course, Assad fled to Moscow immediately after his fall, but they also insist this principle of inclusivity is incredibly important for the European Union to move ahead.
And the issue, of course, of migration played a big role as well in these
Well,
talks.
this is absolutely a huge topic as it stands, because not just when you look at it through the prism of the EU, but really European governments, we are seeing that the political landscape in Europe is changing. Obviously, the discourse around migration, asylum rules, and refugee status, which are three different things to some extent, is certainly much tougher. It has really hardened. Germany, which is a country that took in the highest number of Syrians, has now completely changed its narrative from we will manage dealing with almost 1 million people who arrived in Germany to now the chancellor is saying we need to accelerate the returns because the war is over and they need to rebuild this country. That was a question that I put to Syria's foreign minister al-Shaibani, and he told me, yes, they agree there is a need to rebuild the country, but it will not be chaotic. Syria has not committed to a specific number of people returning to the country. Let's take a look.
There was
no agreement on this matter, and there was no agreement on the number of Syrians
to return to Syria. There has been talks about Syrian refugees in Europe and in Germany in particular, and there are talks and an agreement on a mechanism that will not hinder the process of reconstruction in Syria today. This is another thing I do not agree with, especially since today European countries no longer accept granting asylum to those who leave Syria, especially since today they believe that the situation in Syria evolved with a secure and stable law. However, we have warned against this matter, that imposing an involuntary and undignified return of Syrians will lead to chaos in Syria, and that the situation in Syria needs to create an appropriate environment.
And you can watch the rest of that interview on Euronews. But now, EU defence ministers have wrapped up talks in Brussels, with the bloc's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, expressing frustration over the lack of progress in boosting arms production here in the EU. A big focus of the talks was also on how Ukraine should use a slice of the €90 billion loan for defence acquisitions. Our EU correspondent, Angela Skujins, asked Estonia's defence minister, that's Hanno Pevkur, how confident he was, though, that these EU funds won't be misused. This is in light, of course, of the corruption scandal engulfing Zelensky's former chief of staff, Andrew Yermak.
Well, we need to have the accountability in place, so there is no question. I believe it is definitely something Ukrainians are looking into very seriously, because it's also important for them that there are no rumors or no problems involved with that kind of assistance, because at the end of the day they need to get the support up and running for next years to come, and then even when the war will be over, or if the war will be over, then Ukrainians still need our assistance, our help, so to rebuild Ukraine and to help them to be a normal European country. So this is why it is first and foremost for the Ukrainians to show for their own people and for us that everything is in a good shape.
And talks on security and defence will continue today in Bucharest in the President of Ukraine's President Zelensky and NATO's eastern flank countries. But now moving on, EU institutions are getting ready for a long bank holiday weekend here in Belgium. But it won't be relaxing, given nerves are high over President Donald Trump's big trip to China tonight. With Brussels often caught up in the middle of the two great superpowers, this trip will be closely watched. Our Jakob Janis tells us why you should watch it too.
For the first time since 2017, Donald Trump visits
China.
Yeah, I think you got it. Meeting Xi Jinping to discuss Iran, nuclear weapons, trade and AI. The self-styled deal-maker arrives with a weakened hand.
Because let me tell you, you don't have the cards.
And between the increasingly unpopular Iran war at home and domestic courts striking down his tariffs, Trump needs a win. So your reporters started to wonder, what could this mean for Europe? Alright, first, the security bargain. Xi Jinping wants a signal that Washington is stepping back from Taiwan. And if Trump treats the island's security as a bargaining chip to secure China's help in ending the war in Iran, he might hollow out Europe's own strategic commitments in the Indo-Pacific. And Trump is also under pressure to relax chip exports controls for quick business deals. And if he trades away this edge, Washington and Beijing will set the global standards for AI alone, with Europe becoming just a rule taker, not maker. And finally, there is the trade squeeze. European firms are already struggling to compete with cheap Chinese goods at home. So if Trump relaxes tariffs, the flood of cheaper electronic vehicles and steel might result in European exporters losing their competitive advantage in the US to the same Chinese rivals that are already flooding European shores. And speaking of trade, let's not forget Trump has given the EU a deadline until the 4th of July to finalize a new US-EU trade deal or face 25% tariffs on cars. And in Brussels, the centre-right EPP group is rushing to settle, as a weekend Trump could turn his attention towards Europe next. However, socialists are standing firm, insisting that European legislation will not be shaped by threats on social media. And it's a cliché to say that the Chinese word for crisis, wei qi, is translated as a danger and opportunity. And while wei is indeed danger, a better translation for qi is a crucial point. And it seems that for Europe that crucial point is happening now.
And now for the view from Australia on Trump's China trip and the freshly signed EU-Australia trade deal. I'm joined here in the studio by the Australian ambassador to the European Union and NATO. That is Mr. Angus Campbell. Good morning and welcome to Europe Today.
Hi, Maeve. Thanks very much.
Great. So as we're sitting here, President Trump is en route to China with tech leaders like Elon Musk and Tim Cook. What are you looking out for during this?
Hey, look, it's clearly a very important meeting. And it's important for the two countries. It's important for the world. A constructive relationship between China and the United States is something that I think we all hope for. And indeed, there are many issues that, if they work together, can be of great benefit to our world. So I wish them success, and I'm very pleased, and I think that we should all be very pleased that they are talking and that a summit is occurring. And it's now up to the dialogue and what outcomes might emerge.
And of course, Australia signed a massive trade deal with Brussels this very year, precisely to reduce dependencies on China for critical raw materials. Will that work, though?
Look, we're delighted with the free trade agreement. The negotiations have concluded. President von der Leyen visited Australia to make the announcement with Prime Minister Albanese. The process now sees the agreement go through the ratification mechanisms. But this is a deal that's been negotiated for 10 years. Very careful, very sensitive, acknowledging concerns and interests on both sides. And I'm confident that we're seeing a balanced deal here, which is comprehensive, which is going to be of benefit to both sides. And it brings the two communities closer together. Australians trading into Europe, Europeans trading into Australia, almost all barriers and tariffs removed. It's a good deal.
It's a good deal, but will it help you wean off these dependencies on China?
We have a constructive and a very significant trading relationship with China, and I think that that's going to continue, but we have a diverse trading relationship across the world. So Australia trades into North America, into the ASEAN nations, to South Asia, North Asia, into Europe. We're an island continent dependent on global trade, on the rules of trade, and free trade agreements matter because they enable the prosperity for all.
And defence plays a big role as well in this trade deal. Tell us more, and do Australians support the fact that you're helping Ukraine?
So in parallel to the announcement of the negotiations of a free trade agreement coming to conclusion, there was also the announcement of a security and defence partnership between Australia and the EU. And that's another step forward in building a relationship across the breadth of security and defence, often in areas of hybrid or advanced technology or things that are geographically borderless.
And are Australian taxpayers comfortable with this?
And people are very supportive of the idea that we reach out and we build more connections with more friends on more issues, because by doing so, we are better prepared in a world that's perhaps less predictable and more complex.
And with a very transactional president as well in the White House. One final question on the social media ban that the European Union wants to copy from Australia. Is it working, though? How are you enforcing it?
So the social media ban is about a relationship with the large social media companies. A bipartisan parliamentary concern for the well-being of our children, and indeed the increasing evidence scientifically of that concern, and a relationship with those social media companies to see their restraint on access until the age of 16 for young people in Australia. And we think it's the right way to move, and we note that many countries are now looking at similar models. And I think it's about the effort that you apply and the effort that collectively is applied to see a change in the normative behaviour of what we understand as social media and how it might affect our kids.
Indeed, it's certainly been closely watched. Ambassador Campbell, thank you so much for coming into us here on Europe Today.
Thanks, mate.
And now to Budapest, where Hungary's new government, led by Péter Magyar, has been officially sworn in for the next 4 years. The new Prime Minister promises to restore public trust and rebuild Hungary's international ties. For the latest, we can head straight to the Hungarian capital and bring in our correspondent, Zoltán Zibosegi. Good morning, Zoltán. Just tell us who is who in this new government and what are their first priorities?
Good morning, Europe Today. So actually, this new government is really diverse. Péter Magyar promised during the campaign that nobody can be a minister who was chief politician in the last government. But actually, this promise was not fully kept because, for example, the new transport minister previously was the public transportation company's leader here in Budapest and also a far relative of Viktor Orban, while the defense minister served as chief of staff during the previous political era. The finance minister had also worked as a state of secretary in Viktor Orban's second government, but now he promises to introduce the euro around 2030. Most members of the new cabinet have been close allies for Peter Magyar since 2 years from the really beginning of his movement, and most of them, they are conservative. One notable exception is Balint Ruf, the minister leading the prime minister's office, who was a really big critic of the Orban government and a really popular podcaster. He promised the biggest investigation in Hungarian history against the corruption cases. The government also includes internationally respected business men. The new interior minister, for example, is a former leader of Decathlon, and also the economic minister was a top manager for Shell. Peter Magyar has also a small scandal because he appointed his brother-in-law as a Minister of Justice, but after seeing the public rage, he changed his mind. So the technocrat government now tries to rebuild all the international ties, same as the schools and hospitals. And first and foremost, the most important, they try to take home the 10 billion euros EU fund what was frozen. And according to our sources, it's not going to be easy. We hope that all the ministers will work with that passion how our health minister was performing his iconic dance, what was viral on the whole internet.
Absolutely, that dance was something else. Zoltán Szibozsegi, thank you so much for that live update there from Budapest. Now moving on, EU ambassadors will be getting together today for the very first time to come up with a joint plan for containing the spread of the deadly hantavirus. For an expert opinion, we can bring in now Professor Luke O'Neill from Trinity College in Dublin. Good morning, Luke O'Neill. Normally I tell my guests, lovely to have you with us, but in this case, when I see you, it's normally for bad news. But just tell us, we're hearing the World Health Organization says there's no risk to the general population and the hantavirus is not like COVID-19. What is your view here?
That's exactly correct. Yeah, it's not like COVID at all. It's a different virus, different disease course. Very rare, this disease, the hantavirus causes overall, extremely rare. You know, unfortunately, of course, this outbreak on that cruise ship has happened and we need a bit of caution because it's got a high mortality is one worry. 40% people might die of this, but it's extremely rare. So it's nothing to worry about at the moment. As long as we contain it properly, of course, is the key thing.
As long as we can contain it properly. But people are alarmed because the headlines are alarming, bringing us back to those days of COVID. What would your advice to people be?
Don't worry at all at the moment. I mean, let's just keep an eye on it. And all the great and the good, the CDC in the US, of course, in Europe as well, our agencies are keeping a very close eye on this. I mean, clearly it's a bit scary given the level of mortality that we've seen reported. People have died of this virus. It's extremely rare. Remember, in Argentina, about 100 cases per year out of a population of about 40 million. That's how rare it is as a disease, you know. But again, it's something to watch. Our initial fear was the virus might have changed. It might have been worse. That's not the case. It's the Andes strain of Hanta, and it's been seen for years and years. So we know a fair bit about this.
We do. And of course, more cases are expected after the long isolation periods. And EU ambassadors will be gathering today here in Brussels for the very first time to discuss this. But of course, as you say, it's not an emergency. But what would your advice be to those politicians in the room today?
Well, one good thing is it is a real disease in South America, so we may learn more about it anyway from this incident. That might help the situation in South America where it's more common. And the second thing is, of course, we need to be a little bit cautious. You can understand why they're meeting because it's all over the media. European citizens are concerned, of course. So anything we can do to reassure people is the most important thing, I feel. And at the moment, you're right. The funny thing about this virus is it can incubate in the body for 40 days. In other words, you can catch it, no symptoms for a week or two, hence the 42-day quarantine. There's 2 Irish people, many nationalities, stuck in quarantine for the next few weeks, just in case the disease emerges. And that makes perfect sense to keep an eye on these people.
OK, Professor Luke O'Neill, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expert opinion with us here on Europe Today on Euronews. And thank you so much for tuning in. As always, for more news on the hantavirus or any of the stories we're covering for you here, take a look at euronews.com. And you can reach out to us, of course. Drop us a line, europetoday@euronews.com. That is our email address. We love hearing from you. Take care, though, and see you soon here on Euronews.